Hello, this is Miss Clark. We are on Chapter 2 of Standing Against the Wind. We will also read Chapter 3 in this sitting. As Patrice walked to school the next day, she barely noticed the cold. For her, school was one of the few places she felt good, felt normal. Well, actually, class was where she felt normal. In the cafeteria, in gym, in the halls, Patrice felt more like a mouse trying to make it to the cheese before the cats got it. Yeah, that was Patrice. A small, skinny, unwanted mouse surrounded by well-dressed, cool cats with nice hair. Now, I just want you to pay attention for a moment to the colon here. So the colon is telling the reader that there is a list coming. So look at how the list, small, comma, skinny, comma, unwanted mouse, comma, surrounded by well-dressed school cats with nice hair. So that is a list that describes Patrice. And the colon tells us as a reader, a list is coming. King Middle School wasn't the best school, but it was the only one within walking distance of Auntie May's. Patrice had heard that the Ida B. Wells Middle School on the north side had much more accelerated classes, better teachers, and better resources, but she wasn't in that district. Besides, the parents there had to do 25 hours of volunteer work. There wasn't any way Auntie May could put in that much time, and Patrice would never dream of asking her to. But the teachers at King seemed to really like Patrice. In fact, the only people at King who spoke to her on a regular basis were the teachers. Usually Patrice tried to time her arrival, so that she missed the gauntlet in the hall before her first class. But today she was so deep in thought, reliving the night before, that her timing was off. It wasn't until she heard Eddie's familiar nasal tone that she realized it. "Well, Puffy, the magic hairdo has arrived," he sneered. "Shut up, Eddie," snapped Monty. "Hey, Patrice. Back up, y'all. Let her through." Eddie looked a little taken aback by Monty's quick command. Usually he got more jokes off before Monty said anything. The others looked mildly surprised, but as usual, did the bidding for their leader. Patrice shot a grateful, full-faced smile toward Monty and hurried inside. She was feeling almost happy when she heard Chanterelle Hall and Sarah Tompkins, the 8th grade girls at school. They came up behind her as she was shoving her books into her locker. So one other thing I want you to notice the italics on the word "the," and notice how I read that. So the italics tell us as a reader that we need to stress when we read out loud, or even if we were just reading it in our mind, that word, because italics give us that direction to stress the word that we read. "You, Puffy," called Chanterelle. "Hello, Chanterelle," muttered Patrice. Girls like Chanterelle and Sarah always made Patrice feel small, young, underdeveloped, and funny looking. Dressed in baggy Hilfiger jeans and a FUBU sweatshirt, Chanterelle looked feminine despite her boyish hip-hop clothing. Sarah's style was the opposite. Notice the colon, and we're going to have another list. Skin-tight pants, black high-heeled boots, and a snug Calvin Klein sweater. In her hand-me-down Levi's and too big sweatshirt, Patrice felt like a fashion don't. "Hey, girl, we saw your big sis last night at the hairdresser," said Sarah. Patrice noticed the new hairstyle she had, an updo that made her look more 17 than 13. Wondering how she slept without messing it up, Patrice pulled out her English folder and slammed her locker shut. Yeah. Was the shop busy? She looked not really caring. She hadn't seen her sister in almost a week, which wasn't unusual. Girl, answered Chanterelle, if you would ever go in and get something done with that good hair of yours, you would know that that shop is always full. Shoot! All the new customers have to either get up and go in at 6 a.m. and hope they get done by 8, or go in after work and hope they get home before midnight. It's a good thing we can go there right after school, otherwise we'd never get home. I bet you could get your hair done for free. Chanterelle also had a new hairstyle that Patrice thought made her look too old for anything good to come of it. Sarah hooted. That's right. If my sister was the best hairdresser in the neighborhood and I had all the hair you got, I'd be looking too good with a new hairdo every other day. Now, notice how I went through and I reread my, and I really put an emphasis on you because they are italicized. Patrice looked at them and shrugged. There was no use explaining that she hardly knew her sister. What would they say if she told them that Charisse only came home for a fresh change of clothes or to sleep for what seemed like days on end? Patrice and her sister were extremely different. Charisse was now 18, a high school dropout who was lucky enough to be a great hairstylist. Curvy and dressed to kill all the time, she loved a party and always wanted to be surrounded by people. Charisse was worldly and talkative. This past year was the first time Patrice and her sister had even lived in the same place. Charisse had been raised by her mother in Chicago, while Patrice had been raised by her father's mother in Georgia. Yeah, well, class is going to start, muttered Patrice, anxious to end the conversation. I'll see y'all later. Chanterelle and Sarah smirked at each other and parted so Patrice could make her escape, but she'd taken only a step away from the locker and the 2 fashion plates when she heard her name called again. Now, let's stop here for a moment and let's analyze this metaphor. So, Patrice looks at Chanterelle and Sarah as fashion plates. So, as people who are representative of the current fashions. So, if I were to ask you to give some detail of how Chanterelle and Sarah are fashion plates, you would scroll up to, this is a good place where that colon was, to describe that Chanterelle looked feminine in her boyish hip-hop clothing. Okay, and there is the Hilfiger jeans and the FUBU sweatshirt. And then Sarah's style was opposite, with the skin knit pants and the high-heeled boots. Okay, so this paragraph right here is where you find the textual evidence that these 2 ladies, Chanterelle and Sarah, these teenagers, are fashion plates. Plus, you could also refer back to this point in the text here where they had both had new hairdos done and that they went to the best hairstylist in the neighborhood, which happens to be Patrice's sister, who is named Charisse. And I find it very interesting that Patrice and Charisse have names that sound very similar. Yo, Patrice. Patrice was about to grimace, but stopped mid-frown when she realized that whoever had called her had used her real name. Turning, she came face to face with Monty. Hi, Monty, she answered, noticing the slightly shocked look on Chanterelle's and Sarah's faces. What's up? Hey, I just... started Monty. Hi, Monty. Looking good as always, interrupted Chanterelle, sidling up to Monty and boldly wrapping her arm around his. Yo, Chanterelle, you're looking good too, Monty said, turning his attention to the pretty light-skinned girl. Patrice felt her heart tighten, and she bit her lip in disappointment. But disappointment at exactly what? She didn't know. Hey, Monty, you're just gonna ignore me? Whined Sarah, stepping in front of Patrice to get closer to Monty. Patrice watched with both envy and disgust as the two girls flirted effortlessly and shamelessly with Monty. After a few moments, she had her fill and turned to get to class where she belonged. Hey, come back here, Monty called after her. She sighed, stopped at the door to her class, and waited as he coolly jogged toward her. Yes, she said, feeling suddenly very annoyed at him. What is it? Monty looked down at her intently, not saying a word. He seemed to study her face for a moment, then gave her his half-smile, half-smirk. Hey, I wanted to make sure it's still okay for me to bring Michael up to your place after school today. Of course. I said it was okay last night, said Patrice. Monty seemed surprised but not angry at her curt tone. Actually, Patrice was a little surprised at her tone, too. She usually didn't show her emotions except when she cried. She also didn't really know why she so annoyed at Monty. Yeah, just send him up at about 4:30, she said in a softer, more normal voice. The bell's about to ring. You better get to class. Monty leaned against the door jamb, as if he had all the time in the world, and looked at her again. Patrice felt her face get warm under his close scrutiny. She looked down at her feet. What? She asked, directing her question to her shoes, rather than to the boy in front of her, as she became more and more uncomfortable with his silent staring. Now, I just want to, before we move on, take a look at the alliteration here. Silent staring. How lovely that sounds in this sentence. She became more and more uncomfortable with his silent staring. I think I'll bring him up myself, he finally said, if that's okay with you. Patrice looked at him and shrugged. Yeah, whatever, she answered, noticing that he still seemed to be staring at her. I'll see you later. Yeah, no doubt you will, Monty said as the bell rang. Patrice felt strangely excited and relieved as she finally sank gratefully into her seat. The rest of that day was very odd for Patrice. Usually, she would go to class, walk through the halls, and have lunch with a single person talking to her. Now, take a moment and study this dot, dot, and dot. So these are spacers to let us know that the scene has changed, that there's a different idea, moment, scene coming in. So we go from this hallway conversation between Patrice and Monty into Patrice's reflection, her inner dialogue about her day. Rashid or Eddie or both would make a snide comment in the hall, but that didn't count. After all, they were talking about her, not to her. Big difference. But for some reason, this school day found Patrice a much sought-after girl. Between second and third period, Chanterelle and Sarah had run after her in the hall and practically demanded to know why Monty wanted to talk with her so badly. Patrice instinctively knew that Monty would not want anyone to know his business, especially those two, so she enjoyed the pleasure of not telling them anything about what appeared to them to be a really juicy secret. Of course, it wasn't all that juicy. But they thought it was, and it was killing them not to know why Monty had left them so quickly to catch up with Patrice. Between fourth period lunch, Raven Brown, another somewhat popular and fashionable girl from the in crowd, had walked with Patrice to the cafeteria, all the while asking her why Chanterelle and Sarah thought she and Monty might be going out. That question made Patrice laugh out loud. Raven even sat down and ate with her, but only because she wanted to be the one to get the scoop. Usually Patrice ate alone reading a book, which she preferred, especially to Raven's company. Patrice wasn't a big fan of Raven's. She thought Raven's name was eerily accurate. Raven was a big black girl with little eyes and a harsh voice. So let's stop at a moment and take a look at the symbolism here. So here's this rival character of Patrice's named Raven, who looks like a raven. She always seemed to hover around the edges of a conversation, picking up bits of gossip and spitting out the information to anyone who would listen. Patrice had read someplace that ravens were known for eating dead bodies after battles and were sometimes associated with death and disaster. With her nasty habit of spreading gossip, even if it hurt other people, Raven was just like the bird. Now, I'm going to make a text-to-text connection here. In the beginning of the school year, we read The Raven. And we know that the raven kept saying nevermore about Lenore, the dead Lenore. That the characteristic here that this writer chooses to give Raven is that which somewhat hovers over death and disaster. And Raven's personality is one who doesn't care if she hurt other people, just like the bird. Just like the bird in the Raven story, the poem by Edgar Allan Poe. Didn't care that as he kept saying nevermore to the narrator who was agonizing over the lost Lenore, that he kept saying nevermore. Did not answer any of that narrator's questions about his lost love. Raven's eyes had almost popped out when Monty sauntered over to their lunch table, leaned between them, and said to Patrice, "We're still on for this afternoon, right?" Patrice had smiled at him and answered simply, "Of course." Raven's mouth had dropped open. By the end of the day, the entire school, or at least the entire 8th grade, must have known that something was going on between Monty and Patrice. There hadn't been bigger news than this since a boy named Malik Sellers had gotten arrested in social studies for selling pot out of the last stall of the first floor boys' restroom. For Patrice, the attention was a new and rather exhausting experience. At the final bell, she sat in her chair and waited for the halls to clear before leaving the room, hoping that the gossips had started for home. Then, just when she thought she could have a nice, quiet, cold walk home, she heard her name called out for what seemed the millionth time that day. It was the principal, Mrs. Hutton. "Yes, Mrs. Hutton," answered Patrice, wondering what she could have done to get the principal's attention. "I would like a word with you before you leave. Follow me, please." Mrs. Hutton led Patrice into her office and pointed to a chair. "I have been looking at your transcripts. You have excellent grades." "Thank you, Mrs. Hutton. I try," answered Patrice. "So it seems I received some information regarding a scholarship competition that I think you should enter," said Mrs. Hutton, holding up a thick stack of paper. "There's an African-American boarding school called—" "Dogwood Academy?" shouted Patrice. The feeling of hope she had experienced yesterday came flooding back. She felt her face light up. Mrs. Hutton smiled and nodded. "That's correct. Dogwood Academy. It's in Mississippi. An excellent institution. One of the few African-American boarding schools in the country and probably the best. The scholarship contest is for students who have shown exceptional academic promise. I would like you to enter the competition. Your test scores are excellent and your writing skills extraordinary, according to your teachers. Thank you, ma'am. Patrice was practically shaking with excitement. Well, there is quite a lot to do, and all applications must arrive at Dogwood by February 21. I think you are quite capable of winning a scholarship, and while I hate to lose such a fine student, it would be a wonderful opportunity for you. Here is the material that you need to get to me no later than February 18th. Our school's district applications are to be sent under one cover on the 19th. I must stress the importance of getting all the materials completed no later than the 18th, so I can deliver them to the district headquarters in time. Please let me know if you need any assistance. I've already told your teachers that you would be approaching them for letters of recommendation, and they were more than willing to write them for you. Oh, thank you so much, Mrs. Hutton, said Patrice, clutching the packet to her chest. Mrs. Hutton smiled. It's my pleasure. Work hard on it, and I know you will win one of the 3 scholarships. That day, with thoughts of Mississippi floating through her head, Patrice's walk home didn't seem so cold. We are now on Chapter 3. If you'd like to stop and answer some of the comprehension questions on Chapter 2, stop here and then come back to Chapter 3. Patrice arrived home a little later than usual because of her meeting with Mrs. Hutton. It was after 3:30 when she settled yet another argument between Mark Anthony and Nefertiti. She found that she barely had time to start dinner and her homework before there was a knock at the door. Hey, Monty. Hi, Michael. How are you today? Ready to do some homework? Asked Patrice, showing them both into the apartment. Patrice called Nefertiti and Mark Anthony to the dining room table and busied herself getting them started on their homework. Talking to her cousin about their work helped soothe her nerves. She had thought that Monty would just be dropping Michael off, but it appeared he intended to stay, which made her feel jittery. Monty, on the other hand, seemed as calm as ever. Patrice watched as he surveyed the place. She had always thought of the apartment as messy, but that was before seeing the one in which Monty lived. Now she decided that the apartment was simply cluttered with knickknacks. Auntie May had a penchant for gathering figurines and picture frames. Patrice was in charge of dusting them, naturally. Monty looked at the dozens of photographs, stopping at an old picture of Auntie May and her brothers and sisters. That one. Your mom's? He asked, pointing to an old photo of Patrice's mother. Yes, she answered, looking at the picture. She's very pretty, he said, picking it up, studying it. Yeah, I guess, Patrice shrugged. She hadn't quite forgiven her mother for taking her away from her grandmother and bringing her to Chicago, then going to jail 2 months later. Thinking about her grandmother always gave Patrice's heart little stabs of pain. To Patrice, it seemed that her leaving had made her grandmother give up on an active life. The cards and letters that Patrice regularly received from her were full of complaints about new aches and pains and life at the nursing home she'd moved to after Patrice left. You look just like her, Monty said, pulling Patrice back to reality. He looked at Patrice, studying her face as he had her mother's picture. Patrice shrugged again. I guess. Do you get all those A's by guessing? He asked, setting the picture carefully back in its place. Patrice smiled. No, I study, which is why you brought Michael here, so we had better get started. Michael, why don't you do this worksheet I found, and then you can read to me a little, okay? Patrice cleared the table and showed Michael to his seat. Monty wandered over to the table and pulled up a chair next to Patrice. "Where's your aunt?" "Let's see, it's Friday, so she had to go to her other job. She usually leaves just a little before I get home. She works Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings at the new restaurant on 16th Street. She won't be home till late tonight." "Well, how about Michael and me just come up the days she works late?" "I." Monty looked at her, his eyebrows raised. "What? You what?" "I. It's Michael and I," corrected Patrice. "Whatever. You're supposed to be tutoring him, not me." "Sorry, that schedule works for me." "Cool. Get started." "Jeez, yes, sir." For the next hour, Patrice tutored Michael, who, after his initial shyness, opened up to her. Patrice could tell he was a smart kid because he learned quickly. She couldn't help wondering how he could have gotten so far behind. Nefertiti was in the same grade, but she was much better reader and was getting really good at simple addition and subtraction. From all the time Patrice had spent helping Nefertiti with her homework, she was able to quickly figure out what Michael's weak spots were. He didn't even know the easy words such as dog, cat, and the. He also kept mixing up the numbers 2 and 5 and the numbers 6 and 9. As for addition and subtraction, he didn't seem to be familiar with the concepts. Excited about the challenge of helping him catch up, Patrice quickly formulated a study plan in her mind. She had assumed Monty would hang out with his friends, but he stayed the entire time, alternately looking at the family pictures in the apartment and sitting opposite Patrice and Michael. Throughout the session, Patrice was acutely aware of his watching and listening. It made her stomach feel funny. By the end of the hour, Patrice could tell that Michael was fading. He could focus intensely, but he was young, and he tired pretty quickly. By 5:30, he started squirming in his seat, rubbing his eyes, and it became obvious that he needed a break. "Okay, Michael," said Patrice, putting him on his shoulder. "You did a great job." Patting him on his shoulder. "You did a great job today. We'll work some more next time, okay?" "Okay, thank you, Miss Patrice," said Michael in a quiet, polite way. "Hey, it's just Patrice, okay?" "Yes, ma'am." Patrice smiled at him and was rewarded with a gap-toothed, shy smile. "Michael, would you like a snack?" she asked, heading toward the kitchen. Nefertiti, who, to Patrice's delight, had remained silent and courteous throughout the study session, quickly reverted to her true self upon hearing the word snack. "I want something too," she whined. All right, let's see. How about some graham crackers and milk?" suggested Patrice. "Whatever," said Nefertiti, now boldly staring at Michael, who was doing his best not to look her way. "Hey, I know you," she shouted suddenly, poking Michael in the shoulder and getting his full attention. Nefertiti liked having people's full attention. "You go to my school. You always sit alone at lunch. You're in Mrs. Cassin's class, aren't you?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cassin's class, ain't you?" Now, the reason why I corrected myself is look at what Patrice does. "Aren't you?" said Patrice automatically. She handed a plate of crackers to Monty. So Patrice is correcting the grammar, the speech of the people around her. Patrice has pretty high standards of how to speak. I like that. "Yes," mumbled Michael, staring at a cracker and carefully dipping it into his glass of milk. "Why come you don't sit up with the rest of us from the building?" "Why come? For heaven's sake, Nefertiti," scolded Patrice, "leave him alone. Let him have a snack in peace and stop pestering him with your bad grammar." "Stop being such a nag, Patrice. I'm just asking him a few questions." "Leave him alone for now, okay?" "Sorry, Michael." She can be a little bold sometimes. Monty, who had watched this exchange with his smirk on his face, turned to Patrice. There's nothing wrong with being bold. There's a person I know who ought to be a little bolder sometimes. Finish up, Michael. It's getting late. I need to pick up Mia and the others from Mrs. Robinson's. I'm sure she's handled them too long for today. Who's Mia? Asked Nefertiti, turning her attention to Monty. She's my little sister, answered Monty, looking amused by the dark little girl who is obviously afraid of nothing. Is she my age? Can she play with me? Nah, she's a baby. Just turned 1. Oh. Until yesterday, I didn't know you had so many brothers and sisters, said Patrice as she walked Monty and Michael to the door. I have 4 brothers and 1 sister. That I know of, replied Monty curtly. Oh. Okay. Patrice quickly changed the subject. I wish my aunt would have Mrs. Robinson babysit Mark Anthony and Nefertiti more. It worries me that she sometimes leaves them alone. Well, you're around most of the time, said Monty. I wouldn't stress. Patrice turned to Michael. I guess I'll see y'all Monday. Have a good weekend. Thanks, Miss Patrice, replied Michael. It's just Patrice, Michael, okay? Thanks, Patrice. Oh, sorry, wrong voice. Thanks, Patrice, said Monty. See you around. Yeah, answered Patrice. Sure. So you can stop there. That was chapter 3. And now you can answer the comprehension questions for chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed me reading to you, and I look forward to reading to you again. Have a lovely day.